On today's episode of Locked On Wild, hello, Vinnie Hinostroza.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we will do a little Boston postmortem as we hear from John Hynes from the 3-0 loss for the Minnesota Wild last night. We'll also talk about Jakub Lauko, who is hurt once again, moved to IR pretty quickly, and we'll talk about a waiver claim that the Minnesota Wild made today. Vinnie Hinostroza, what he brings, and we'll talk about the Ryan Hartman connection as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and, it was, like I said yesterday in the postcast, it was a better effort, but the same problems still persist for this Minnesota Wild team as they fall 3-0 to the Boston Bruins. Second consecutive game that the Wild are shut out. First time that's happened since November of 2022. So, not great. But let's hear from John Hynes and his thoughts as to how the game went against the Boston Bruins yesterday.
Says that you got shut out and you lost the game, but it felt like a completely different effort from what we saw in Ottawa. How do you assess this one?
Yeah, I think it was a good road trip. I mean, 3-2 on the trip, and counting the Chicago game. And tonight, I thought we competed hard. I thought probably some of our execution could have been a little bit better. I thought we had some looks. Swayman made some good saves. We had some good pushes and surges in the game. I think our execution can be a little bit crisper, but overall, we'll take the positives out of the trip and get home.
That's all that's missing, John, considering the pressure, the number of looks, the effort, just to get a goal. It's just got to finish one at this point.
Yeah, I think so. Tonight we certainly had looks and had offensive zone pressure. And, even you look at the first goal, right? We got an extended D zone shift. They scored. We had a big, long one in the second period and had, as good a looks and it didn't go in for us. So, like I said, I think, 3-2 on this road was good for us. I thought, the game that we played tonight is certainly something we can build on and get some rest and then get ready for 2 games at home.
Same apply to the power play?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was they generated. It wasn't like we weren't in the offensive zone. It was just some looks that on other nights, I think the execution's a little bit sharper and you hit some of those plays, and tonight we didn't.
Like the second goal too, you had that 3-on-2 rush, and then I think Lino fell and then you could have went the other way. Yeah,
exactly. I think that was a little bit, we had a great look at one end, and it doesn't go in, and then they have a look on the other end and it does. So, but I liked, I thought our response back from the Ottawa game, the focus level is where it needed to be. Like I said, it didn't go our way in certain areas tonight, but I think it's certainly something that, as I said, I'm proud of the guys for the road trip, and there's lots of positives, coming out of this game going into the game at home.
What was better defensively, most notably, I guess, to keep it tighter?
I just think our attention to detail. It's it's really two things. I think we're very the guys play with a commitment to detail without the puck that we certainly had tonight. I thought our competitive level was good, and we had much better offensive zone pushes and stretches where we were able to play offense, which is your best defense tonight.
Usually you're hauling win streaks home. Now to go home and try to just finish, on a positive note going into the break, is that a very kind of finite focus that it's easy probably for the team to have the rest of the week? Yeah,
I mean, we just looked at the trip even coming after the Ottawa game. We had an opportunity to have a great road trip. I think we had a good road trip. So now we'll reboot and then get focused in for Carolina.
Some interesting things that John Hynes keyed in on there for that post-game hit. Most notably, you look at the execution of a lot of the attempts, because, as we looked at in the stats last night, the Minnesota Wild did generate 3.4, I think it was 3.53 expected goals. So by that metric, the Wild did a good job of generating. They just couldn't finish. And we knew that finishing was going to be a problem for this Minnesota Wild team. I think a lot of what we discussed last night still applies. You're still devoid of a couple of pretty key spots where you would love to have players that have a ton of offensive skill and a ton of finishing ability. And as of right now, this Wild team they don't have a ton of that. So on those nights where goalies can get the upper hand regularly, that's going to cause some problems. And so that did last night. You look at it too. I forgot completely about that rush in which Marco Rossi was pushing the puck up, tried to go one way to Marcus Johansson. He lost his balance. Marcus Foligno on the other end lost his balance as well. That's the same sort of thing. This is the skill versus physicality debate. Is if you had a player that had a little more skill on that line, they probably are able to keep themselves upright and go into the zone and finish that off. And of course, Boston goes down to the other end and they immediately score. That's just how it works. So Hynes is right. The effort was better, but some of these problems that we're starting to see are not problems that are going to get fixed this year. This is just a continuation of some of the things that we've seen with this roster and the effort level and attention to detail, those types of things. The reason that John Hynes is keying in on those is because outside of like your top four guys, you've got a lot of guys that give you more of that physical presence, that defensive presence, and so you have to manufacture the offense. Is basically what Hynes is talking about when he talks about the details. Is crisper passes so that you can ensure that instead of trying to hit the home run pass and maybe being accurate on that 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 times, if you can be accurate on shorter passes up the zone, it gives you a better chance to get into the zone and be able to set up camp to be able to try to score on the opponent. So I think that's what he means when Hynes keys in on the details. Is that it's something that this team needs to manufacture if they're going to consistently score goals and avoid these types of stretches that we have seen far too often over the last few years. These guys, you can't just expect that you're going to plug somebody in to a top 6 spot and that, oh, hey, because Ryan Hartman scored 35 goals, that's just going to be the norm. That is not the norm. Because these types of players are more bottom 6 types. The skill level is obviously lesser. From an offensive standpoint, I don't mean to suggest that they don't offer you anything, because they clearly do. It's just they're being put into positions that I think are a little higher than where they would normally slot in. We like to use the benchmark of like, where would this guy play on a playoff team? If you took and put a player like Marcus Foligno, he'd be a third-line guy for the Dallas Stars, third or a fourth-line guy. If you put him on the Colorado Avalanche, he'd be a third or a fourth-line guy. So if they're in those spots, they're fine. But if you are having to elevate players into top 6 roles, into second-line roles, that's when the problems arise. So opportunity to finish and kind of just get back on track at home starting tomorrow against the Carolina Hurricanes. We'll have a preview of that game with Zach Martin of Locked On Hurricanes coming up for you tomorrow. So that should be fun to kind of get back to the crossovers. And, of course, we will have Denny's show at 5:30 to gear you up. A full hour with Denny to get you set for the game tomorrow night. It's a 6:30 game because it's on, I believe it's on ABC. So it's a 6:30 game tomorrow night. So we'll take air at 5:30, and Denny's going to talk about Matt Boldy. He's going to talk about Ryan Hartman. He's going to talk about the officials. It's going to be an outstanding show, and you are going to want to make sure that you tune in for that at 5:30 tomorrow. When we come back, we're going to talk about Jakub Lauko. He's had a rough go this season, and it just continues. We'll talk about the latest roster move involving Jakub Lauko. That's on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, now that is the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. A reminder, once again, we will have Denny's show for you coming up tomorrow at 5:30. So make sure to join us on YouTube. We'll take you all the way up to the start of the game against the Hurricanes. So should be an exceptional show. You are not going to want to miss it. Let's take a look at the latest in what has been a really unfortunate season for Jakub Lauko, as Lauko was put on injured reserve once again today. And so let's paint the timeline of the series of unfortunate events for Jakub Lauko this season. So Lauko gets injured early on. He gets put on regular injured reserve. Works his way to be able to come back. And it was a welcome for the Minnesota Wild because, you know, they were playing a bunch of AHL guys on the fourth line while Lauko was out. Lauko gets to the point that it seems like he is ready to return. And we hear a term that I have literally never heard before this year, in that Lauko has been shut down because his rehab has stagnated. And he comes back for a little bit, and then, you know, we're at the point now where he has been shut down again. Now, this is a new injury, which is kind of concerning. So Lauko out of the lineup on long-term injured reserve, so he is not eligible to return until after the Four Nations face-off is done. And we're at this point for the Minnesota Wild, which, honestly, I'm surprised that we weren't at this point earlier. Basically, if the Minnesota Wild suffer an injury at this point, they are automatically putting players on injured reserve because they are just that desperate for roster spots. But I'm going to use a phrase that former Minnesota Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer used that just, I think, kind of paints the unfortunate reality that Jakub Lauko finds himself in right now. And it was in regards to, I forget which player exactly, but Zimmer was asked about a particular player and, you know, boy, you'd like to really have him back. And Zimmer said, and it was kind of cold, but at the same time, he said, you can't help the team in the tub. And I think Lauko has been a nice addition for this team. He He keeps things light. He's a nice speedster. He has, he has added some physicality, and I think he has added some intrigue on the penalty kill as well when he's been put there. But he has played 33 games so far this season, and now is expected to miss, another probably 7 or 8, depending on how long this plays out. From the sounds of it, this is a new injury, so timetable is anybody's guess, but you can't. And for where this team is at, the amount of injuries that they're dealing with, like, it would be nice if he was able to come back in a shorter frame of time, but you can't take that luxury. You can't take that risk because you just desperately need the roster spots. And it would have been, before this, I would be very amenable to Jakub Lauko re-signing. I think he has added a nice little presence on that fourth line, but if it's only going to be for 50 to 60 games out of an 80-game season, you can find fourth line guys pretty effectively. I would rather, I guess, at this point, just take the roster spot, which is unfortunate because he's only 24. But again, if you're not in the lineup, you can't really make an impact. So I'm not gonna throw full judgment on that until the season is done. But that's kind of where my mind is sitting right now. Is I think this is going to probably be a one and done, and you just look elsewhere for a way to fill that roster spot. And this brings me to a point that I have made in previous episodes about roster construction. Now that we will finally be out of the Parise and Suter mess for the most part, I know they still have the buyout portion of their cap hits is still going. Now that we are navigating out of that mess, I would love to see roster construction go back to normal, because I think there has been so much emphasis put on getting guys that profile as bottom six players. And the reality of the situation is you can find those guys. You can acquire those guys and add them to your roster, which should be prioritized. And what I hope is prioritized going forward, what should be prioritized going forward is top six talent and putting together combinations that are going to be able to score you goals and give you offense if your bona fide number one guys run into a little bit of a cold spell. It is just continuing to, it's been an issue for 2 years for sure. You could even say 3 years, because the year 2 years ago that the Minnesota Wild were still decent when Philip Gustafsson was a Vezina candidate. They couldn't score any goals. They went through a similar stretch where I think they scored 4 goals in like a 6-game span, but they somehow won a couple of those because there were a couple of shutouts involved. Secondary scoring has been an issue for this team since Kevin Fiala was traded. I still, it's not like I'm saying that was a failure of a trade for Bill Guerin, because I still think that both Brock Faber and Liam Ogren are going to play large roles on this team going forward. But that's the reality of the situation, is that by Bill Guerin making that move, he was getting rid of what was a valuable asset for this team, the notion of secondary scoring. And that we've seen flashes of that kind of be replicated over the last couple of years, but it just has not been consistent. And if you want to pinpoint arguably the biggest reason that this team has hit the skids a little bit, it's because they only have one threat to score. They only have one line that is a threat to score, and until that changes, these sorts of things are still going to take place. The top line combination of Marco Rossi, Matt Zuccarello, and Matt Boldy, they're battling, they're generating chances, but if they're not finishing, nobody is. So I hope that we move into a little bit of a new era here that features a little bit more focus and a little bit more attention given to top six talent. Danila Yurov, whether it be him, whether it be Riley Heights, I don't care who it is. I just would like for it to be somebody so that you don't have to put Freddie Gaudreau into a top six role. You don't have to put Marcus Foligno into a top six role. Those guys can just play their particular roles without all the added pressure of having to be one of the ones that scores. And guess what? Then when they go play in the third line, if they give you goals, that's absolutely a bonus. That is gravy for your offense and for your team as the season unfolds. You're not expecting it to happen. But until we move to a point where we're not expecting those guys to play major anchor-type roles offensively, until we reach the point that you don't have to rely on that, this kind of stuff is going to continue to happen. So I wish Jakub Lauko a speedy return because he brings a presence that I think is valuable. It's just hard to have that sitting on the bench. You know, you can't help the team in the tub. That's all I'll say. We're going to finish because the Minnesota Wild made a roster acquisition today. So we will finish by talking about Vinnie Hinostroza, who was added to the Minnesota Wild roster. You may say, how on earth is that possible? Well, we'll do a little investigating, and we'll tell you about the Ryan Hartman connection to all of this. That is on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Are you looking for tickets for your next big event? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sporting event, finding the right tickets at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Here's how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through thousands of options. And the seat view feature, game changer. Before you even hit buy, you can see exactly what your seat will look like from your spot in the venue. It is amazing to be able to get that before you even get to your game, your comedy show, whatever you're attending. You can see what you'll see right from your computer. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they will refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. I'll lay out the schedule for tomorrow once again. We'll have a crossover episode with Zach Martin of Locked on Hurricanes to preview tomorrow's game against Carolina. That'll be first. After that, we will have Denny's show at 5:30, a special pregame edition of Denny's show. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to tune in for that at 5:30. We'll have a postcast for you coming up after the game as well. So if you got to pick just one of those, definitely make sure that you listen into Denny's show. We hope you can pick all three, but I know how it is. People's lives are busy, so we just appreciate you taking time out of your day to tune into Locked on Wild, wherever you may be tuning in from. The Minnesota Wild, in addition to putting Jakub Lauko on injured reserve, they claimed Vinnie Hinostroza off waivers from the Nashville Predators. As Michael Russo tweeted out earlier today, gives them an extra forward with, if I remember correctly, his buddy, Ryan Hartman, suspended. Turns out these two were teammates in Chicago back in the mid-2000s, about 2016, 2017. So Ryan Hartman getting another friend on the bench here while he is out of the lineup. Now, what does Hinostroza bring to the table? Well, he is 5'10". He is 183 pounds. He was originally drafted in the 6th round by the Chicago Blackhawks in the 2012 draft. He is a center / forward. He has not taken a ton of faceoffs, so he plays more of a wing position. As is mentioned by the website Bench Rates, Vinnie Hinostroza is a high-quality depth forward who will help in defense when required and can also play at a level above $3 million. And this, I think, is indicative, once again, of Jakub Lauko being injured. And the Wild, I think, just not being super sold with what they've seen from some of those AHL guys that have filled in on that fourth line, with the exception of Devon Shore. Outside of that, there really have been kind of empty calorie minutes that have been produced on that fourth line, which is a reason that line has been very streaky from a goals perspective, is you're just not getting consistent performance from those guys that that are in that spot. So again, another veteran. So if you are sick and tired of seeing veterans get claimed up by this team, I get it. But he's not. It's not like, and I saw one person tweet out saying, can't wait to see him play third line center over Marco Rossi. Like, if he ends up doing that, then I'm going to shut off my microphone and just say, all right, let him have it, because he shouldn't. He should be, as he is, just a 7th or a 13th forward that can potentially play on the fourth line if needed, but is not going to be called upon for more than that. This is clearly just a body, and with the exception of some of those guys that have been mentioned, Brendan Gaunce hasn't really given you a ton. Ben Jones hasn't really given you a ton. Liam Ogren's already up on the roster. Beyond that, I don't know who else would warrant getting called up to fill a fourth line / 13th forward spot. Hinostroza can clearly do that. And maybe it's a situation like with Travis Dermott where he can give you a little something. That's the main thing, is the Wild just have had too many instances this year where they're putting players in position to get minutes that just have not given you a ton. Is it fair to those players to be put in the spots that they have? Not all the time. But at the same time, do something. Too many empty calorie minutes on this team that if Hinostroza comes in and he can actually give a little something, then count it as a good move, as a solid waiver claim from my perspective. And it's not like the Wild haven't had success with these types of situations. Now, obviously, he's a little older than Declan Chisholm, but so I don't know. He's a guy that's coming in to just give them a body to get through until somebody's able to return. So if he ends up playing a top 6 role, then the team is just asking for losses to stack up at this point. Beyond that, I don't really know a ton about the guy, so I guess we'll just see what happens. He did tell The Athletic, excited for the opportunity to play hockey in Minnesota. I've heard nothing but great things about the organization, as well as the support from the fans and community. Being an away team in Minnesota is always a tough atmosphere. Can't wait to be on the other side of it. So we'll see what he brings. But I don't anticipate him doing much other than just being kind of fourth line insurance for this team that they definitely need. So we'll see how that plays out. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, full schedule for you coming up tomorrow. We've got a crossover episode with Locked On Hurricanes. We will also have a special pregame edition of Denny's show at 5:30. So make sure, again, if you can only pick one of the three, definitely pick that one at 5:30. And we know that's the reason everybody tunes in week after week anyway. So make sure to tune in for that at 5:30. Then we'll have a postcast for you after the game as well. So full day of Locked On Wild coming up for you tomorrow as the Wild get to the final couple of games before the Four Nations face-off break. Yippee. Make sure to hit subscribe if you have not already, and we'll catch you for the next episode. We've got you covered every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.